Hey folks, it's John P. with Geek Beat TV, and we are continuing our live coverage here at the CEDIA Expo at the Wisdom booth, where we're going to find out what is in this giant black box.
This episode of Geek Beat TV is brought to you by Netflix.
So I'm here with John from Wisdom, and John, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Certainly, anytime.
You guys have some absolutely beautiful looking speakers. I noticed these speakers mounted on the wall. I believe these are the LS4s, and they are a different type of speaker technology than a lot of people have probably experienced in the past. What can you tell us about that?
We're probably best known for our planar magnetic technology. It's an advanced thin film technology that uses very powerful magnets to move the film, so it starts and stops on a dime. It's also a very simple load for the amplifier to drive, so the amplifier sounds as good as it's ever going to sound. And as a matter of fact, this particular model is made up of 4 of these driver modules, one of which we have over here on the table.
Oh, let's take a look.
Here at CEDIA Expo, we're talking home theater. And what I love about my home theater is Netflix. It offers so much flexibility because I can use it on so many different devices anytime I want. iOS, Xbox 360, the Wii even, a lot of TVs now. I mean, it's just anywhere you want it. And there are so many different movie options that I can stream anywhere, anytime. You can do the same. You can get a free trial because you are a Geek Beat TV viewer. It is a limited time offer by going to netflix.com/geekbeat.
So we've cut away a portion of the backside of this panel so that you can sort of see what the guts of the inside. The thin film is a polyamide film. It's a high-tech saran wrap, if you will, and printed directly on that high-tech plastic film is the voice coil. It looks like printed circuit board traces on a PCB, but this is the voice coil for the speaker, and it's sandwiched between 2 layers of, in this case, about 600 magnets per module.
Wow. So what you're telling me is the entire thing has a thin film in it, and that thin film is the actual speaker driver, if you will.
Right. Instead of a cone or a dome, we have a planar piece of film that moves in a tympanic fashion rather than a pistonic fashion like a normal woofer might. In a normal speaker, dynamic speaker, that's all sort of one big chunk of metal, and the heat that you're putting in the form of electrical energy, most of which gets converted to heat, really has no place to go. Here we're taking that voice coil and stretching it out over a very large surface area so the heat can dissipate very easily into the room, and you don't get any thermal compression. It's a much more alive sounding speaker.
Excellent, excellent. Now, I notice we're looking at the back and we're seeing kind of the guts of the film and stuff, but if we look on the front, there's something very interesting going on here. What is this golden orangey kind of strip going down the middle?
This is the tweeter section, and it's something called reticulated copper. It's like a copper foam. If you imagine melting the copper, and then they're like foam on the top, almost like the head of a beer. And then you scoop off the foam, you flash freeze it, all the little bubbles pop, and you're left with this incredibly fine lattice work of copper, which is 95% open air. So it's acoustically transparent, but it serves 2 purposes for us. We actually mount the neodymium magnets that are used for the tweeter section in the foam to create the proper distance from the film. But the foam itself, which is on both sides of the diaphragm, actually acts as a heat sink to draw heat away from the tweeter section, increasing the power handling even further.
So you've got one gigantic tweeter that runs the whole length from top to bottom of this speaker, and on top of that, it's basically a giant cooling fin, so you can just keep pushing power into it. So one other question for you is, I know that when we look at tweeters and mid-range units in most speakers, they're kind of directional. Like I would imagine that this tweeter would only, you'd have to be standing kind of right in front of it in order to get the really high frequency sound. Does that apply to these speakers as well?
It doesn't, and the reason is that the directivity of any speaker, regardless of the technology that's being used, is a function of how big the driver is that's making the sound compared to the wavelength of the sound it's making. As those numbers approach, begin to be about the same, it gets sort of closed down and works more like a spotlight instead of a floodlight in terms of how it sends sound into the room. Here, by the time you get to the shorter frequencies that would be more directional on something this wide, we're only using this much of the speaker. So it still is a nice wide dispersion into the room. You can be anywhere in the room, hear everything.
Wow.
But because it's very tall for those same frequencies, it launches the sound into the room without spreading vertically. It eliminates ceiling and floor reflections that otherwise confuse the sound, muddy up the sound. You hear more of the speaker and less of the room.
Right, right. Okay, so this giant thing takes care of our high frequencies and our mid-range frequencies, and I believe you told me previously that this thing handles, it goes down to about 80 hertz. But what happens, what if I want the bass? What do I do then?
You have to have below 80 hertz. This is planar magnetic technology all the way down to 80 hertz. At 80 hertz, we intend you to use the big black box that you were
The big black box? What the heck is the big black box? Folks, if you look at this, I am 6'1", okay? This thing is basically almost my height, okay?
Well,
what is in this? Oh, it is, okay, that's fair.
It's 5 feet tall, 3 feet deep, and about 1.5 feet thick. So it's a big box.
What is in this giant black box?
There are two big 15-inch Pro woofers in here in a regenerative transmission line. It covers from 80 hertz all the way down to 15 hertz. And one of these boxes can generate more than 130 dB at 20 hertz.
Wow.
So
that is amazing. I mean, yeah, and it could like hurt your ears if you really turned it all the way up. You gotta.
Well, as a matter, we do factory trainings for our dealers, seminars, and an early prototype of this was the first engineering prototype was out in the lab. We were doing the factory tour, and we put the most powerful amplifier on it that we had in the building that day, and put on a signal generator, just pure 20 hertz, and just turned it up until the amplifier was just shy of clipping, and it was putting out 134 dB. We had an SPL meter standing there. And it was, at 20 hertz, even something as loud as that, it's not painful in the sense of want to cover your ear because it's such a low frequency. You feel it more than you hear it, but everybody felt it. And everybody's knees were a little bit wobbly for the next 10 minutes as we're walking around the factory.
I am sure they were. Okay, so the big question is, let's say I want to pick up a set of these things for my house. What's it going to run me?
Well, if you're doing a 2.2 system, so stereo over there and two of these, that would be about $100,000.
That would be one awesome system. I would love to have one of those in my house. So if you guys have an extra, 100 grand to drop on a set of these things, come check out the guys at Wisdom, and I'm sure they'll get you hooked up. Thanks for staying tuned to us for coverage here from CEDIA, and keep an eye out on youtube.com/GeekBeat TV for even more goodies on the way. Let's go take a listen to them.